Hello and welcome to 15 Minutes on Shiraz Part 2. In the first session, we talked about old vines and history and heritage. And today, we're going to have a look at cooler climate styles that people may not be quite familiar with, and just that changing style of Shiraz coming out of Australia. So we'll look at cool climate regions, just scan over them and we'll see it through the lens of one specific region with our guest speaker today. I'm going to spend a bit of time, as mentioned in the first session, on Shiraz and its forming the backbone of some beautiful classic and very historic blends. And then we'll spend more time on this whole style revolution. A little bit of drama. Let's use the word revolution, shall we? Quick snapshot of history again, because I think it's important to just sort of set the stage for where Shiraz has been and where it's come from. Original Shiraz vines came to Australia in the early 1800s, early 18s. I mean, the vast majority came in the 1830s, which was prior to phylloxera in Europe. They all came from Europe and South Africa. That time frame is important. Before the advent of phylloxera, there's been no phylloxera in many parts of Australia. Now, because of this fact, we are home to the largest collection of old vine Shiraz anywhere in the world. And we discussed old vines in the first section. So there's more information if you want to look at that, old vines specifically in the first session. But clearly Shiraz thrived in a lot of the original colonies as they were expanding these warmer zones. Now it's grown in virtually every region in Australia, and there's this full range of styles and flavor profiles. And I've said it once, I'll say it again. There is no country on the planet, no region on the planet that can do with Shiraz what we can do with it when you get to experience the full sort of faces of Shiraz across the country of Australia. Regional expression, very much the defining sort of factor in the modern look of Shiraz today in Australia. So we'll spend a bit of time looking at this, the backbone of Shiraz being a great blending partner. Now, sometimes that's about different vineyard sites in different regions in blending, but it's also a function of other varieties doing well with it. This is not an exclusive look at that, but GSM, Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre, or in fact SMG or SGM, depending on the dominant variety, it's always formed a really solid backbone. And looking at the different contributions the other wines bring to this, but typically you're getting this lovely sort of savory notes and upfront juicy, vibrant fruit. Blackberry, mulberry, and plum flavors forms a massive part of the flavor profile of GSM blends. A real classic. We're not the only country to do this, but boy, have we made it kind of one of our own. Shiraz and Cab, what a brilliant combination. One of my favorite classic blend styles in Australia. Usually they range around something sort of 50-50, 40-60, but in that sort of time frame, and they're just such great blending partners. Cabernet gives this incredible structure and sort of flavor profile, and the tannin and acid, and this beautiful, gorgeous fruit that we know and love about Shiraz. Wonderful stuff, incredibly age-worthy. And then this became a bit sort of hip and trendy to blend or at least co-ferment a little Viognier in there. And this is a cool thing. Everyone seemed to do it for a while. And now that what's emerged is that a lot of the really classic examples have stayed. Really nice way to do things. It adds this sort of textural sort of softness and slipperiness that winemakers talk about, elevates the aromatics of the Viognier. You'll see that in there, but it also elevates the lovely floral aromatics, which sometimes get lost in Shiraz. There's just something about this co-fermentation that brings a beautiful floral element to the final blend. It's not just about the Viognier, it's about what Viognier brings out in Shiraz as well. Clonakilla is arguably one of the greatest examples of that globally. Talked in the first session a bit about techniques influencing Shiraz, and a lot of these things that are happening in the winery are an important piece of the puzzle. And then with our guest speaker in a moment, we'll talk a bit about some of these techniques, but a whole bunch of fermentation, adding stems to it, using carbonic maceration techniques, wild fermentation, people using wild and native yeast that happen to be the ambient yeast strains in the air and in the vineyards in these specific areas. These co-fermentations, oak use we'll talk about. Ben Glazer talked about it in the first session. Better quality oak and better use of oak. These are all things that have influenced this modern look of Australian Shiraz, even in the classic regions, that vibrant element, which is a really important piece of the puzzle. As we know, it's grown everywhere. There's legitimately Shiraz grown in even cool climate areas like Tasmania. It's grown in every region. So it stands to reason that there's a lot of different styles out there, and you need to experience them to fully understand it. We looked at Barossa in some of the South Australian regions. One of the cool climate regions in South Australia would be Adelaide Hills. Not exactly cool climate in the Hunter, but the reality is the style of classic historic Shiraz in the Hunter is more medium-bodied and savory, not very high alcohol, and then definitely heading into cooler zones in Canberra District, where the famous Clonakilla wine is. Beautiful medium weight, red fruited and savory scented wines. But the real focus today for us is this various areas in Victoria. We've got Grampians, you've got Heathcote. Heathcote, not exactly cool climate. Beechworth is. There's Yarra Valley. There's all sorts of other areas in here. But we're actually going to go into a little spot here, not on this map, tucked away here in a little elevated area called Strathbogie Ranges. And today we've got Matt Fowles from Fowles Wines, who's going to join us and tell us a bit about growing cool climate Shiraz. Morning, Matt. Welcome.
G'day, Mark. How are you?
No complaints on this side of the world. So, Strathbogie Ranges. Most people probably haven't heard of it. If you're in the know, you'd know, but most people don't. I was stunned when I first came up and visited. It's a stunningly beautiful region, but it's cool up there. Tell us about growing fruit, growing Shiraz specifically up in the Strathbogie. Tell us where Strathbogie is and what you love about it and growing Shiraz there.
Yeah, well, we're 130 kilometres north of Melbourne in the state of Victoria. And when you look at a map, people think of it as central Victoria, which is also where you'd find Heathcote region. And as you pointed out with Heathcote, it's a lot warmer. It sits in our flats, the flats of Victoria. But in this case of the Strathbogies, there's this huge mountain range stretching from Melbourne right up the eastern seaboard of Australia. And the Strathbogies is the first foothills on the western side of that mountain range. So we're actually very elevated, which is why we're cool, but we have no maritime influence. So it's a continental climate. So we get that large diurnal shift. And the best example I can give is when we're in the vineyard during the day, it's T-shirt and shorts and sweating, hat on. And then by night, it's jacket and you want to put a pair of pants on because it cools down so much. So we have that more, I guess, desert-like climate. Our snowfields, we're part of a mountain range which joins into our snowfields, and they're only an hour away. So we'll get flurries of snow in winter, and it's genuinely cool climate.
Yeah, and also stunningly beautiful, quintessential Victorian countryside. I was blown away that first time I visited. Now, tell me about growing. Now, because it's funny, because we all know the warmer climate Shiraz regions. People know that it's sort of maybe easier to grow fruit in general and Shiraz specifically, but Shiraz straddles. It's a lovely variety that has a nice range of sort of climates that suit it. Now, talk about growing Shiraz in a cooler climate. Is it harder? What are the challenges, or indeed, what are the pleasures of it?
Well, historically, actually, we found it hard to get Cabernet and Shiraz ripe in the Strathbogie Ranges. So it's been really interesting. I've been in the region for 15 years, and even in that time, we've seen a shift with vintages coming earlier and temperatures warming. So, the pleasure for us, I guess, is that it's become less marginal, less marginal and pushing into, a variety that's comfortable growing in this region. In terms of challenges, obviously in a cooler climate, we tend to harvest later. We've harvested as late as May for our Shiraz. So, that's pushing it way out there. And, that's one of the challenges. We need a lot of time to get it right. But one of the features of our ancient granite soil is that we just don't crop massive crops. So, it's always a pretty manageable crop load, and we find that, we can get it right. The good thing, obviously, is that with that cooler climate, you're getting a bigger window to get your picking decisions right, which is obviously, I think, the key to getting the wine right. So, we've got a relatively long time to be sampling fruit and making sure that we're getting those flavours exactly where we like them with retention of acid.
Yeah, not a compressed vintage generally. I'm sure there's exceptions, but not a compressed vintage generally. But I think what I like about certainly your wines, but also wines from some of the cooler zones in Australia, it's nice to show people that there's a more sort of medium weight and sort of almost like a dark raspberry and sort of floral scented savory component to different regional Shiraz. And I think it's also, I'm seeing this a bit more certainly on the ground here in the US, people trying these different regional expressions and going, never mind the evolution in some of the classic regions, trying these regional Shiraz and going, That's a surprise to me. That's actually, a different expression. It's getting people excited again, because I feel like it's fair to say that people knew, oh yeah, I know Shiraz from Australia. It's like, no, you probably don't. And that's these kind of wines that are getting people sort of almost a resurgence of interest in them. So.
Oh, most definitely. When we take our Shiraz around the world, it's that spicy and floral characters that really capture people's imaginations. And I used a really bad analogy with a prominent wine journalist off the cuff a while ago, and it met with a few blinking eyes, but then kind of resonated. And the analogy is if you take a male cage fighter and a male ballerina, you strip them down to their boxer shorts, they essentially look the same. You dress them back up in their clothes and you let their craft manifest. One is about power and one is about grace and elegance. You can't argue that neither is powerful or intense. They are both powerful and intense, but they manifest very differently. And I think where people are getting excited now is with that grace and elegance and the springiness and vitality we're seeing in Shiraz from cooler regions, but also I think there's a revolution from warmer regions as well. We saw such a transition in Chardonnay from those big Malo, oaky, rich, possibly blousy styles to these finer, more acid-driven Chardonnays. And I think really we're seeing a similar thing with Shiraz. Yeah. And I know in amongst our colleagues, we're seeing, this focus on spice and aromatics and vitality and springiness in the wine. And that's something we've always been very focused on as a producer, one, because of region, but also as a preference we have. We love wines that work well with food and highlight the cool climate nature of our region. So, that's been a thing for us.
The UFC fighter, I'm not sure I'll ever adopt that sort of analogy, but I do like it. I know where you're going with it. I think it's awesome, because I do think one of the things that and when we've talked about this with Barossa, you're absolutely right. Even Barossa, McLaren Vale, you're seeing a style shift. You're seeing this sort of the warmth and the ripeness you want, the comfort that you want from Shiraz from those regions. But there's just this more flavorful and sort of drinkable sort of nature and freshness to the wines. And I think even in our cooler climate zones, you're still getting that lovely, beautiful concentration of fruit that is Shiraz and defines Shiraz, but in a slightly different sort of framework. But it's still Shiraz. It's not ever going to be lightweight and delicate. You're still getting the power. And I think that's exciting. Okay, so you drink. I know I've been out with you. You like drinking wines from all parts of the globe and all parts of Australia. Love what's going on in Strathbogie, but in your lovely state of Victoria specifically, or maybe anywhere in Australia, what else do you like? There are a couple other regional expressions that you think, hey, if you haven't tried these, knock yourself out and try them. Some of those maybe slightly lesser known regions to the average consumer.
Oh, definitely. Look, I think one of the things I'm really enjoying is we'll call it the warm climate revolution, this moderation of style, I guess. But in our region, I think Grampians to our west is very exciting. I'm a sucker for everything south of us, so it might be Yarra Valley and Macedon Ranges, for example, but also Tasmania. I think, the Shiraz down there is, I think, super exciting. And so, yeah, if you were to grab a bottle of Shiraz from any one of those regions, I think you'd be really happy and, for a lot of people, really surprised.
Awesome. Good stuff. And yeah, funny, Tasmania, we always talk about it's sparkling wine country, it's Pinot country, it's Chardonnay country. And there's been a couple of fairly award-winning, sort of little warm pockets in there, award-winning Shiraz coming out of it. And it just sort of leads into that lovely discussion. Wherever you turn in Australia, whatever region you're in, almost without exception, you can find a little pocket of some really exciting Shiraz, and it's something to spend some time with. Really appreciate your time, Matt. Lovely insights. Always a pleasure. And so get out there, experiment with Shiraz, check out the revolution for yourselves.